My name is Evelyn Harper, and I am 62 years old. I used to teach English literature at a high school in the suburbs of Seattle, back when mornings began with the aroma of fresh coffee and the rustle of students digging through their backpacks. Now, my mornings are quieter, sometimes too quiet, and I tell myself that this is what peace means. That morning, Michael asked me to meet him at a coffee shop in downtown Santa Barbara. He said we needed to talk about the budget, though the words sounded more like a warning than an invitation. I arrived early out of habit and chose a small table by the window, the smell of espresso mixed with the salty air coming off the ocean. I tried to think of something light to say when he arrived, something maternal and unimportant. He arrived 10 minutes late, phone in hand, talking numbers. His voice resonated in the coffee shop, confident, rehearsed, the kind of voice that makes people listen. When he finally sat down, he smiled briefly and said, "Mom, seriously, you have to stop spending like we're in 2005. I smiled because it was easier than defending myself. I ordered 2 lattes and a slice of pecan pie to share, pretending it was just another Sunday. When the server brought the check, I reached for it by instinct. Michael leaned back, amused. "Let me," I said. I foolishly wanted to prove I could still contribute something. The server slid the leather folder toward me, and I pulled out my card. The machine beeped once, then again. I swiped the card a second time. The screen flashed red. The young man's face changed, looking embarrassed, compassionate. Before I could react, Michael's voice cut through the air between us. "Yeah, I blocked her access," he announced. "She's been draining my account on things she doesn't need." The coffee shop went silent. A couple at the next table turned around. I felt every gaze on me, my pulse thundering in my ears. I tried to laugh, but no sound came out. Michael smiled mockingly, tapping on his phone. "One day you'll thank me." I looked at him, my only son, the boy I had once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, and said, quietly, "You're right." He smiled, thinking I was surrendering. But as he turned back to his coffee, something inside me shifted. The sting of humiliation cooled into something firmer, quieter. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I already knew I wouldn't need his permission for much longer. After Robert died, the house in Sonoma felt too big for one person. Everyone told me it was practical to downsize, that moving in with Michael would be easier. He said it so smoothly, the way children speak when they want to sound disinterested. "It'll save you money, Mom. You won't have to worry about the garden or the bills." At that moment, it sounded like comfort, a modern house in Santa Barbara with white walls, large windows, and a faint scent of citrus that Michael liked to spray everywhere. He showed me the guest room, my suite, as he called it with a smile that almost looked affectionate. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I felt steady again. That was 3 years ago. Now, the mail usually arrives in his name. He handles almost everything, claiming it's to help me, though I feel like he monitors every letter I receive, separating what matters from what doesn't. The utilities, the insurance, the small deposit from my pension, everything goes through his accounts. He keeps the receipts in neat binders, labeled household and mom's expenses, as if I were just another category between the groceries and the gasoline. Sometimes I stand at my bedroom window and look at the street. The magnolia tree across the driveway blooms every spring, heavy and white, like the ones Robert used to prune back home. But when I look at this place, the stainless steel kitchen, the minimalist furniture, the walls without photos, it doesn't feel like mine. Michael insists this arrangement is for security, but security, I have learned, can be a silent cage. I still keep a photo of Robert on the nightstand by my bed. It was taken on the pier in Monterey on a windy spring morning, his tie crooked, his smile uneven, like he was trying not to laugh. Sometimes I talk to that photo when the house is too quiet. It's silly, I know, but his silence still feels like an answer. He handled our finances with the same serene patience he put into everything. "Never hand over what is yours, Evelyn," he told me once, sliding a stack of papers across the dining room table. "People change when money is involved, even family." I laughed at him. Back then, Michael had just started university, excited to study finance, calling himself our future investor. I thought Robert was too cautious, perhaps even unfair. Back then, Michael was different. He would sit at that same table, explaining terms he had barely learned: capital, liquidity, long-term yield, with eyes shining with ambition. Robert would listen to him, half amused, half proud. And I watched them. believing our son would always protect what we had built. Now, those nights seem like another life. The wooden table is no longer in Michael's house. Gone, too, are Robert's files, his leather notebook, the small brass paperweight he used so the bills wouldn't blow away. What remains are his words, resonating clearer with every small humiliation I swallow. Sometimes, passing the photo in the morning light, I can almost hear him again, soft but sure, warning me across the years I spent ignoring him. Never hand over what is yours. And I realized that I did not with a pen, but with trust. Dinner was quiet, at least at first. Michael had ordered takeout from a new bistro downtown, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, everything presented neatly in cardboard boxes. He scrolled through his phone while I set the table, the sound of silverware against glass filling the silence between us. When he finally looked up, it was to tell me about his latest client, a developer from San Francisco who had tripled his earnings in a quarter. His voice had that familiar tone, part pride, part lecture. Then came the sigh, the one he always used before turning the conversation toward me. Honestly, do you not understand how modern investments work? Mom, do you still believe a savings account is a strategy? I folded my napkin, careful to keep my voice calm. I'm not trying to run your business, Michael. I just want to understand where my pension is going. He gave a sharp laugh. Forget your pension, please. Mom, I've been keeping you afloat for years. You should be grateful you're still living here rent-free. My fork slipped from my hand. It hit the edge of the plate with a sound that seemed louder than it should have. I felt my face burn, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I looked at him, his expensive watch reflecting the light, his smile tinged with impatience, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. The boy who used to run into my classroom after school, waving his report card, was gone. In his place was a man who spoke to me as if I were an obligation. After he went upstairs, the house felt too still. I gathered the plates, rinsed them one by one, and wiped the counter until it gleamed. The routine steadied me. Then I stood there, hands pressed against the cold granite, and felt something settle. Not anger, not grief, but a silent certainty. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to beg for respect in a place where I had none. Buried under years of concessions, I still had my own name, and it was time to remember what it was worth. The rain started just after dawn, tapping gently against the windows like a rhythm I hadn't heard in years. Michael left early for a meeting with a client, his voice echoing down the hallway as he reminded me to keep receipts for everything I spent. His words barely registered. My thoughts had been elsewhere all morning on the quiet resolve that had followed me since last night's dinner. I went up to the attic for the first time in months, drawn by a thought I couldn't name. The air was heavy with dust and cedar, with the faint scent of Robert's old boxes stacked against the wall. Most were labeled photos, books, files. One was unmarked, with a leather handle cracked by time. I knelt beside it, wiping the dust from the lid. Inside were pieces of a life I had almost forgotten, yellowed insurance forms, an old fountain pen, a black notebook that still smelled faintly of his cologne. At the bottom, under a layer of folded sheets, I found a worn leather portfolio tied with a cord. Robert's initials were embossed in the corner. My heart tightened as I untied it. Inside were documents I hadn't seen since the funeral, his will, the deed to our old house, and a folder marked Joint Financial Accounts. The last page bore both our signatures, and in clear, official letters, the words, Primary Owner, Evelyn Harper. I read it twice before the truth hit me completely. Michael's management was nothing more than temporary access permission, not ownership. Everything he controlled, every dollar he rubbed in my face, had always been mine. My hands shook, but it wasn't fear. It was something closer to an awakening. I ran my fingers over the typed letters of my own name, feeling their silent weight. For the first time in years, I didn't hear Michael's voice in my head. Only Robert's, firm and serene. Never hand over what is yours. I didn't, I whispered to the attic air. I just forgot where I kept it. The next morning began in the soft gray of dawn, that light that makes the city look half asleep. I left the house before Michael's alarm went off, closing the door carefully so it wouldn't echo in the hallway. The streets of Santa Barbara were quiet, still glistening from last night's rain. I walked a few blocks to the bank without rushing, my purse tucked tight under my arm, the folder inside heavier than it should have been. The bank on State Street stood on the corner of the main avenue, its glass doors shining pale under the morning light. I had walked through them many times with Robert when we opened our first joint account, back when life felt simpler. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and floor wax. A young teller greeted me and led me to one of the private desks at the back. The man sitting there looked up and smiled with polite surprise. "Mrs. Harper," he said. "It's been a long time." His nameplate still read James Miller. I remembered him. He had helped Robert sort out the estate after his father passed away. Kind, but efficient, never condescending. "I need to update an account," I said softly, sliding the folder across his desk. He adjusted his glasses, reviewing the documents. Then he looked at me with a small, understanding nod. "You want to revoke secondary access?" "Yes," I said immediately. He typed for a while, the soft clicking of keys filling the space between us. "Everything will be recorded solely in your name, Mrs. Harper," he said finally. His tone was professional, but his eyes were gentle, the way people look at someone they know has waited too long to do the right thing. When I walked out, the air felt lighter. The clouds were breaking up, and the early sun touched the rooftops with a faint gold. I paused for a moment on the sidewalk, watching a seagull descend over the pier. For the first time in years, the world around me didn't feel borrowed. It was mine again. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen when I came downstairs. Michael was already at the table with his sleeves rolled up, scrolling through his phone with that restless confidence he wore like armor. A half-read newspaper lay next to his plate, the business section open. "Big week," he said without looking up. "Closing a deal today. Commercial property in the hotel zone. If it goes well, I'll finally drop those temporary accounts. By the way, can you transfer $200 for the utilities? I'll handle it later." I poured tea into my cup, careful that my hands didn't shake. The steam rose, soft and steady. "It's already taken care of," I said. "Good," he murmured, still focused on his phone. "I knew I could count on you." He smiled, pleased, sure of himself. The same easy smile he used at 8 years old when I ironed his shirt before a school concert. He didn't look up enough to notice how I was looking at him. His phone vibrated again, and he began dictating instructions to someone, his tone rapid and professional. I sat across from him, drinking my tea in silence. Every word he said about money and control floated harmlessly over the table, touching nothing. When he stood up to leave, he leaned in and kissed the top of my head, distracted, as if out of habit. I smiled faintly into my cup. He thought the world still belonged to him. In a few hours, he would discover it never did. By mid-morning, the Santa Barbara air turned sharp with the promise of rain. From the window of a small café across the street, I could see the steps of the bank, the same doors I had walked through the day before. The cup of coffee in my hands was still warm, though my heart beat with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Michael's silver SUV appeared right on time, parking near the curb. He got out quickly, suit impeccable, phone to his ear, his voice sharp with irritation even from a distance. I had seen that walk before, the arrogant assurance. The rhythm of someone convinced the world still tilted in his favor. He went straight to the ATM near the entrance, tapping the screen with impatience. A moment later, the machine flashed red. I saw the small movement of his hand as he tried again, swiping the card with more force. Another red flash. His shoulders tensed. He muttered something, pulled out his phone again, and stormed into the bank through the glass doors. His gestures were brusque, agitated. The manager, a woman I recognized from years ago, approached with the calm posture of someone trained to handle temperaments. Even across the distance, I could read the moment the truth hit him. His voice must have risen because several heads turned. The words drifted faintly through the open door of the café. "This is my account." The manager's response was measured, clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Sir, this account belongs solely to Mrs. Evelyn Harper. Your access was revoked yesterday." For an instant, the bank lobby stood still. Michael's face went pale. His lips moved soundlessly before he took a step back, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the polished floor. I watched, motionless, as the scene unfolded like a reflection of another day, only this time the humiliation wasn't mine. There was no pleasure in it, only relief. A slow, silent exhale that tasted like peace. I finished my coffee, the bitterness anchoring me to the present. Across the street was the man who had once lectured me on control, now a stranger, powerless. When I stood up to leave, the sky opened slightly, a fine drizzle misting the glass. I left a few bills under the saucer, pulled up the collar of my coat, and stepped out onto the street. The air smelled of rain and salt from the ocean. For the first time in years, I walked without looking back. The house was silent when I returned, the kind of calm that follows a storm. Michael hadn't come back yet. His briefcase was by the door, and his breakfast plate sat untouched on the table, the coffee long cold. I walked through every room slowly, touching the edges of things that were never mine. The smooth countertops, the sterile art, the gleaming floors that smelled faintly of wax. There was no pain this time, just a deep, steady calm. Upstairs, I packed a small suitcase with the essentials. Clothes, my mother's locket, Robert's watch, and the folder from the attic. The rest I would figure out later. I folded a sheet from the notebook on his desk and wrote in my best handwriting, "You were right, Michael. I don't need your money." I placed the note next to his plate, smoothing the corner so it wouldn't curl in the draft. For a moment I stood there looking at it, the period at the end of a silence. Then I took my coat from the rack, left the keys on the table, and opened the door. The air outside smelled of rain and magnolia. I closed the door softly behind me and walked toward the light breaking through the Santa Barbara sky. Weeks later, I found a small cottage hidden behind a line of palm trees near the beach in Cambria. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, weathered shutters, and a porch that leaned a little toward the sea. But when I walked in, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A silence that belonged only to me. The first thing I did was visit the local bank. The teller, a woman my age with kind eyes, helped me fill out the forms. She slid the signature card across the desk. "Do you want to add anyone else to the account, Mrs. Harper?" I smiled, pen poised in my hand. "No," I said softly. "Just me." When I signed my name, it looked different, stronger, as if it had finally remembered itself. The papers rustled as she stamped them, and the sound felt like a small ceremony. Ownership, independence, a life reclaimed. That night, the sky burned gold over the pines. I unpacked the few boxes I brought, placing Robert's watch on the nightstand and the old folder in a drawer. Then I stepped out onto the porch. The light fixture above the door was the kind Robert used to install, sturdy, simple, a little crooked. I flipped the switch. The bulb flickered once, then shone steadily. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I whispered. "It's for peace." The ocean breeze moved softly through the screen door, bringing the scent of salt and lilacs inside. The walls hummed with a silence that was no longer empty.